On August 1, 2025, President Donald Trump shocked the world by slapping a sweeping 35% tariff on a wide range of Canadian imports. The announcement sent immediate ripples through global markets and diplomatic circles, as few had anticipated such a dramatic escalation in trade tensions between the two close allies. The move came after last-minute negotiations collapsed, leaving both nations' leaders and businesses stunned. Hopes for a compromise evaporated overnight, replaced by confusion and a sense of betrayal on both sides of the border. For decades, the US and Canada had built a seamless economic partnership. Now, that trust was shattered overnight. Generations of cooperation and shared prosperity were suddenly at risk, as uncertainty gripped policymakers and business owners alike. Stock markets in New York and Toronto plunged as the news broke. Investors scrambled to assess the fallout, with billions of dollars in value wiped out in a matter of hours. The tariffs hit critical Canadian sectors: lumber, steel, agriculture, industries that fuel communities on both sides of the border. American manufacturers, too, braced for higher costs and supply disruptions, knowing their own operations depended on Canadian inputs. The suddenness left no time to prepare, creating chaos and uncertainty far beyond trading floors. Small businesses, farmers, and factory workers all faced a new reality, unsure how to adapt or what the future would hold. The US and Canada share more than a border. They share supply chains, workforces, and prosperity. Every day, millions of dollars in goods and services cross between the two countries, supporting jobs and families in both nations. This tariff threatened to sever those connections in an instant. The flow of goods, ideas, and people that had defined the relationship for generations was suddenly in jeopardy. The timing was brutal. The same day, a weak U.S. jobs report stoked fears of a looming recession. The combination of trade war and economic slowdown sent shockwaves through communities already on edge. For ordinary people, the headlines were alarming. The peaceful border now felt like a front line in a new conflict, with families and workers left to wonder how their lives would be changed. The world watched, asking why now and what comes next. As uncertainty spread, the future of North America's most important partnership hung in the balance. To understand the chaos that sometimes erupts in the global economy, we need to understand tariffs, a word you've probably heard in the news but might not fully grasp. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. For example, if a Canadian table costs $100 and the US government sets a 35% tariff, that table now costs $135 for American buyers. That extra $35 doesn't just disappear, it's usually passed on to the consumer, making everyday products more expensive at the checkout. Governments use tariffs to protect domestic industries, hoping people will buy local products instead of imports. The idea is to give local businesses a fighting chance. But tariffs can backfire in unexpected ways. While they might help one industry, they often hurt many others, especially those that rely on imported materials or parts. For instance, US builders now pay more for Canadian lumber, which makes building homes more expensive and slows down construction projects across the country. Companies that depend on imports see their costs rise, sometimes forcing them to lay off workers or even shut down. The biggest risk? Retaliation from other countries. When one country imposes tariffs, the other often strikes back with tariffs of their own, escalating tensions. This tit-for-tat can spiral into a trade war, hurting businesses and consumers on both sides of the border and sometimes even beyond. Instead of saving jobs, tariffs can end up destroying them by cutting off export markets and shrinking opportunities for growth. Tariffs are a blunt tool, easy for governments to impose, but incredibly hard to control once the economic dominoes start to fall. They can trigger economic conflict that's tough to unwind, leading to political debates and public protests. In today's interconnected world, the fallout from tariffs spreads fast, affecting global supply chains and markets everywhere. The August 2025 tariffs were a textbook example of how quickly things can unravel, reminding us that tariffs, while simple in theory, are anything but simple in practice. The 35% tariff sent shockwaves through both economies. In Canada, industries like lumber, steel, and farming faced disaster as their biggest market became unaffordable overnight. Business groups and unions warned of layoffs and broken supply chains. In the US, some steel and lumber producers cheered, but most businesses felt the pain. Construction companies saw lumber costs soar, threatening home prices and jobs. Manufacturers using Canadian steel faced higher costs, forcing tough choices, absorb losses or raise prices. The intended job protection in one sector threatened jobs in others. For everyday people, prices crept up on everything from homes to groceries. The psychological toll was real. Uncertainty and anxiety replaced stability. No one knew how long the tariffs would last or how bad things might get. The once stable North American economy became a source of stress for millions. The pain was immediate, widespread, and deeply personal. The Trump administration claimed the tariffs were a response to Canada's failure to stop fentanyl smuggling, a national security issue. But experts saw a different motive. Just days earlier, Canada had recognized Palestinian statehood at the UN, defying US policy. The timing was too close to ignore. Many saw the tariffs as political punishment. Canada had even tried to appease the US by scrapping a digital tax on American tech giants. Yet, the tariffs came anyway, suggesting a broader America First agenda. Analysts agreed the fentanyl argument was a pretext. The real reasons were anger over Canada's independent foreign policy and failed trade talks. This disconnect fueled mistrust and signaled a new era where alliances could be sacrificed for political gain. The rules of international relations were being rewritten at everyone's risk. Canada faced a crisis with resolve and caution, as the nation found itself at a crossroads, forced to make difficult decisions under intense international scrutiny. Prime Minister Mark Carney condemned the tariffs as unjust, but avoided escalating rhetoric, seeking dialogue over confrontation. He urged Canadians to remain patient, emphasizing the importance of unity and measured action in the face of uncertainty. Provincial leaders like Ontario's Doug Ford demanded immediate retaliation, tariff for tariff. Their calls echoed the frustration of many Canadians who felt the country was being unfairly targeted. The pressure on Ottawa was immense. Be strong, but don't make things worse. Every decision was scrutinized, with the government walking a tightrope between public anger and diplomatic necessity. Canada acted on multiple fronts, sending its finance minister to Mexico to strengthen alliances and signaling it would look elsewhere if the US proved unreliable. These moves were calculated to show both resolve and adaptability. Domestically, a $1.2 billion aid package was announced for the battered lumber industry, aiming to protect jobs and stabilize communities hit hardest by the crisis. Business and labor groups united in rare solidarity, backing the government's stance. Their cooperation sent a powerful message of national resolve to the world. Canada's response was layered: calm diplomacy abroad, firm support at home, and new partnerships abroad. The government worked tirelessly to keep trade flowing and protect Canadian interests. The crisis unified the country, but the path forward was fraught with risk. Canadians from all walks of life watched anxiously, hoping for a resolution that would secure their future. Every move was a balancing act, protecting jobs, maintaining alliances, and avoiding escalation. The stakes were not just economic, but deeply personal for millions of families. Canada's strategy: weather the storm, but don't close the door to peace. The government knew that patience and perseverance would be key to overcoming the crisis. The stakes had never been higher, and the world was watching to see if Canada could emerge stronger from the storm. The Canada tariffs were just the beginning. On August 1, 2025, the US launched a global tariff offensive targeting dozens of countries. Tariffs were set based on political alignment. Brazil, India, Switzerland, and more faced steep new taxes. Even allies like the EU and South Korea got hit, sparking global alarm. Retaliation was swift. India and South Africa imposed their own tariffs on US goods. The dispute spread like wildfire, forcing countries to pick sides and scramble for new trade partners. The global economy shuddered, supply chains broke, investments froze, and recession fears soared. Institutions like the World Trade Organization were sidelined as the US acted unilaterally. What began as a US-Canada spat now threatened decades of global economic integration. The world was plunged into uncertainty, with no end in sight. The trade war didn't just disrupt commerce, it shook the foundations of global alliances. For 70 years, the West relied on shared values and economic cooperation, with the US at the center. Now, America's closest allies questioned its reliability. Countries scrambled to diversify trade and build new partnerships, hedging against US unpredictability. Canada turned to Mexico. The EU sought new deals. India and Brazil found common cause. The world fractured into competing blocs, undermining trust and cooperation. Global challenges, climate, security, pandemics, became harder to tackle without trust. The economic cost was high, but the damage to international relationships was even greater. The lesson: alliances are fragile, and trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. The tariffs were meant to show American strength, but they backfired at home. Wall Street's plunge was just the start. Main Street soon felt the pain. U.S. companies faced soaring costs and supply chain chaos, especially after a 100% tariff on imported semiconductors. The economy, already shaky from a weak jobs report, edged closer to recession. The Federal Reserve was caught in a bind, one arm of government slowing the economy, another trying to save it. President Trump's firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief after bad economic news sparked outrage and eroded trust in government data. The tariffs failed to protect jobs long-term. Instead, they fueled inflation and job instability. American consumers and workers paid the price. The trade war left the nation more divided and economically vulnerable. The trade war of August 2025 delivered a hard lesson. In a global economy, there are no winners in a trade war. Both sides suffered. Canadian exporters lost markets, American consumers paid more, and industries on both sides were crippled. Economic nationalism, taken too far, hurts the very people it claims to protect. The crisis showed the value of strong, trust-based partnerships. Even the closest alliances are fragile and need constant care. When trust breaks, the fallout goes beyond economics. Diplomacy and security suffer too. The chaos proved the need for stable, rules-based trade and strong international institutions. The real lesson: no nation is an island. Prosperity depends on cooperation, not confrontation. The path forward is building bridges, not walls. That's the enduring lesson from the brink of a trade war tsunami.